It starts like a dream, but this dream feels real. They see you in a way you've always wanted to be seen. The compliments aren't just generic, they're specific, observant. They land with pinpoint accuracy on the very things you've hoped someone would notice. They remember the smallest details from conversations you barely recall having, your favorite obscure band, the story about your childhood pet, how you take your coffee. They shower you with praise, thoughtful favors, and a level of attention that's both intoxicating and overwhelming. You think, I've finally found it, the one person who just gets me, the relationship that makes all the others look like pale imitations. You feel special, chosen. You feel indebted. And that's it. That's the first quiet whisper that something is off. It's a tiny flicker of discomfort, easily dismissed because it doesn't fit the beautiful picture being painted. Why question this? Why look a gift horse in the mouth? This is everything you've ever wanted, right? You shake off the feeling, but it hangs around, a quiet hum of anxiety beneath the symphony of their affection. You can't quite put your finger on it, but it feels like every kind act, every thoughtful gesture isn't a gift but a payment, a down payment on a future you haven't agreed to yet. It feels like a link being forged in a chain you didn't ask for, and you're just now starting to feel its weight. It feels amazing, but it also feels heavy. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's generosity made you feel trapped, where their constant praise started to feel less like admiration and more like an expectation you had to live up to? This isn't just about romance. It can happen with a friend, a family member, even a boss. It's that disorienting experience where kindness, the one thing we're taught to value, becomes a tool for control. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a subtle and sophisticated form of manipulation. It's often called love bombing, or more broadly, weaponized kindness. Its main job is to make you feel so grateful, so special, and so deeply indebted that you wouldn't dare say no. Now let's deconstruct this type of kindness, and let's be clear, genuine kindness absolutely exists. It's the cornerstone of any healthy, secure relationship. It's selfless, given without expectation, and it makes both people feel good, safe, and respected. Real affection is a slow burn. It's about getting to know the actual person over time, flaws and all. It feels like a warm, steady fire. But what we're talking about here is different. It's a wildfire. It's too much, too soon, too intense. You might have heard this tactic called love bombing, a flood of affection and attention designed to fast-track a connection and gain influence. But the broader and maybe more sinister term is weaponized kindness. This is the strategic use of seemingly positive behaviors, favors, praise, gifts, not from a place of genuine care, but as a way to manipulate and control you. It's kindness with an agenda, a transaction disguised as a gift. Where real kindness builds trust, weaponized kindness destroys it by creating a silent, unwritten contract of obligation. You start to feel like for every nice thing they do, you owe them something in return. This isn't a partnership, it's a ledger. A tally sheet is being kept, and somehow you're always in their debt. The manipulator's compliments are often way over the top. You're not just smart, you're the most brilliant person they've ever met. You're not just attractive, you're flawless. They might call you their soulmate after only a few weeks. This isn't about seeing you, it's about putting you on an impossibly high pedestal. Why? Because from that height, the fall is terrifying, and it makes you scared to do anything that might knock you off. This dynamic preys on a deeply human need, the desire to be seen and valued. Manipulators are great at finding people who are sensitive, trusting, or maybe just hungry for validation. They show up looking like the answer to your prayers, but the affection they offer is conditional. It's a tool they use to create dependency. They aren't falling in love with you, they are grooming you for compliance. The goal isn't connection, it's control. So, how do you tell the difference? Ask yourself how the kindness feels in your body. Genuine kindness feels light, warm, and freeing. It creates comfort, while weaponized kindness often feels heavy. It can trigger a strange anxiety, confusion, or just a gut feeling that something is off. It feels like pressure. You might feel a weird urge to reciprocate immediately, to even the score. That feeling? That's your intuition waving a giant red flag. It's telling you the kindness you're receiving isn't free. It comes at a cost, and that cost is usually your freedom. Once you're caught in this web, a deeply unsettling process begins. The constant praise and favors aren't just building you up, they're systematically taking down your defenses and isolating you. This is where the dream starts to feel like a gilded cage, beautiful on the outside, but a prison on the inside. And the engine driving all of this is guilt. Every favor, every gift, every grand gesture is designed to create a powerful sense of obligation. When someone constantly goes out of their way for you, it's natural to feel grateful. But here, that gratitude gets twisted into debt. You start thinking, after everything they've done for me, how could I possibly disappoint them? This is a calculated strategy. They might offer help in a way that subtly undermines you, making you feel incompetent. They'll insist on doing things you can perfectly well do yourself, all under the banner of being caring. Over time, you can start to feel dependent on them, which only tightens their grip. They might also play the martyr, constantly reminding you of their so-called sacrifices. You'll hear things like, "I went to so much trouble to get this for you," or "Don't worry about me, I'm happy to do it even if it means I have to cancel my own plans." These aren't selfless statements. They are deposits in a guilt bank, which they fully intend to withdraw from later. You start to feel like you owe them your happiness, your time, your obedience, and one of the most dangerous parts of this is how it cuts you off from your support system, all in the name of love. The manipulator will frame their possessiveness as deep affection. They want to spend every moment with you because you're just that special. They'll say things like, "I just want you all to myself," or "Nobody gets you the way I do." At first, this feels incredibly romantic, but then you notice a pattern. They get pouty or critical when you make plans with friends. "Oh, you're going out with him again. I thought we were going to have a special night." Or they might start questioning the motives of your friends and family. "I'm not sure your friend really has your best interests at heart. I just want to protect you." This is how they sever your ties to anyone who might give you an outside perspective, anyone who might say, "Hey, this seems a little intense, don't you think?" By making themselves your only confidant, they create an echo chamber. Their voice becomes the only one you trust. Without anyone else to check in with, it becomes incredibly hard to believe your own gut when it tells you something is wrong. The first phase is a constant, overwhelming flood of positivity. But once they feel they have you hooked, the pattern often shifts to something far more destabilizing. Basically, the rewards become unpredictable. The constant stream of affection and praise suddenly gets inconsistent. One day they're showering you with love. The next they're distant, critical, or cold for no reason you can see. This creates a frantic anxiety. You find yourself desperately trying to figure out what you did wrong to make the affection stop. You start walking on eggshells, constantly trying to read their mood and change your behavior to win back the good version of them, and this up and down cycle is powerfully addictive. The unpredictable nature of their affection makes you crave it even more. You become so focused on getting back to that initial honeymoon phase that you don't realize the entire dynamic is designed to keep you off balance and under their control. And living like this takes a profound toll. You end up in a fog of confusion, trying to reconcile the kind, loving person with the person who makes you feel controlled and anxious. Your self-esteem, which soared at the beginning, starts to crumble. You internalize their subtle criticisms and begin to feel that you're the one who's difficult, ungrateful, or not good enough. Your entire sense of self gets tied to their approval. You lose trust in your own mind. When they deny saying something you clearly remember or you twist your words, that's gaslighting, and you start to question your own sanity. The gilded cage is now complete. The bars are made of gratitude, the locks are forged from guilt, and the warden is the one who claims to love you the most. For anyone caught in this web, there comes a moment of truth. It's the point where your exhaustion or your suffocating sense of obligation finally pushes you to do the one thing the whole system is designed to prevent. You set a boundary. You say no. This is the climax. It's the test that reveals everything. And it's rarely a big dramatic scene. More often it's small. You might just say, "I'm actually too tired to go out tonight. I think I'll stay in," or "Thanks for the offer, but I'd like to handle this project myself," or even just, "I can't talk right now, I'm busy." To a person offering genuine kindness, this is no big deal. "Okay, get some rest," or "Sounds good, let me know if you need me." Their affection isn't based on your compliance. But to a manipulator, your boundary isn't a request. It's an act of rebellion. It's a direct challenge to their control, and their reaction is fast and revealing. This is when the mask of kindness slips, and you get a peek at the anger and entitlement it was hiding on the other side. Their first move is usually a masterfully executed guilt trip. They turn your simple no into a deep personal wound. They reframe your boundary as you being selfish or cruel. You'll hear things like, "After everything I do for you, you can't do this one little thing for me?" This is designed to remind you of your debt. Or they'll play the martyr. "Oh, okay, I guess I'll just go alone. I was so looking forward to it, but it's fine. I just wanted to make you happy." This is engineered to make you feel like a horrible, ungrateful person. It punishes you for having a need that doesn't align with theirs. The message is clear. Your needs are an insult to my generosity. They want you to feel so guilty that you immediately take back the boundary and apologize. If guilt doesn't work, they'll often resort to withdrawing the very affection that got you hooked in the first place. The warmth vanishes. The loving texts stop. The praise is replaced by a cold, disapproving silence. This is punishment, plain and simple. They're showing you what happens when you displease them. The affection you thought was unconditional is revealed to be a reward for good behavior, and you just misbehaved. This tactic is terrifying because it triggers all the anxiety of that emotional roller coaster. You feel the sudden loss of their love, and you scramble to figure out how to get it back. They are conditioning you to believe that setting a boundary leads to painful abandonment. And if all else fails, the mask might come off completely, revealing raw anger. The person who yesterday called you perfect is now lashing out, their voice filled with rage. They might accuse you of being selfish, of taking them for granted, or even of being the manipulative one. This is pure projection. They're accusing you of their own behavior. This explosion is the ultimate tell. It proves the kindness was never about you. It was about their need for control. Your no exposed the whole game, and they react with aggression to get their power back. This is a massive flashing sign that you are not in a safe relationship. True kindness doesn't curdle into anger when it doesn't get its way. This moment is your proof, and it confirms that the kindness was a red flag all along. It was never a gift. It was a cage, and you have just rattled the bars. Recognizing this pattern is the first giant leap, but awareness alone isn't enough. Breaking free requires real, conscious effort. It's not just about seeing the trap. It's about making sure you don't fall into it again. It's about moving from confusion to clarity, and your intuition is your most powerful guide to take your life back. That feeling of unease, of being indebted, of walking on eggshells, that's your internal alarm system. Stop brushing it off. Give it a name. Say to yourself, this feels like pressure, or I feel manipulated, or their kindness feels heavy. Keep a private journal and write down specific examples. Today, they bought me an expensive gift I didn't want. When I said it was too much, they said nothing's too much for you. Later, when I was too tired for their party, they brought up the gift and acted hurt. I felt really guilty. Seeing this pattern in black and white cuts through the confusion and proves you're not imagining things. This isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition. Once you've established a pattern of weaponized kindness, you can now start working on micro-boundaries. You don't need a huge confrontation. You can start rebuilding your freedom with tiny, low-stakes boundaries. It's about practicing saying no without a long, apologetic excuse. If they text you constantly at work, you don't have to reply instantly. Wait an hour. If they ask for a favor you can't do, a simple, "Sorry, I can't right now," is a complete sentence. You don't owe them a 10-page essay explaining why. These micro-boundaries do two things. First, they help you build your no muscle, and you get used to prioritizing your own needs again. Second, you get to see how they react. Do they respect a small no, or do they pout and push? Their response to a tiny boundary tells you everything about how they'll handle a big one. And always remember, a manipulator's power comes from making their approval the center of your universe. To break free, you have to intentionally disconnect your self-worth from their opinion of you. This means reconnecting with who you are. So make a real effort to reinvest in your own life again. Call those friends you've drifted from. Pick up that old hobby or spend time alone doing the things you enjoy, not the things you think will please them. This reminds you that you have a life and an identity that exists completely outside of them. When they give you a compliment, just say thank you. You don't have to immediately return it or feel like you now owe them. Remind yourself, you are worthy of respect just because you exist, not because you're obedient. Also, a therapist can be a huge help here, giving you the tools to rebuild your self-esteem. Now finally, arm yourself with a crystal clear picture of what healthy kindness is, so you can spot the fake version from a mile away. Genuine kindness is consistent, and it doesn't run hot and cold depending on your mood or compliance. It comes with no strings attached, and it respects your autonomy. A truly kind person wants you to be you, not a version of you that exists only for them. They're happy when you hang out with your friends, they support your goals and respect your boundaries, even when it's inconvenient for them. Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, not on a dynamic of a giver and a debtor. They feel safe and steady, not like a roller coaster. They feel like coming home, and the connection grows over time and allows both people to be their full, imperfect selves. Stop looking for the fireworks. That's often just the explosion of love bombing. Instead, look for the quiet, steady warmth of a slow burn, a warmth that grows over time because it's real. We're all taught that kindness is a simple, unambiguous good, and in its purest form, it is. But like any powerful force, it can be twisted into a weapon. It can be used to disarm, to control, and to manipulate. The kindness that feels like a debt isn't kindness. The affection that disappears the second you have your own needs isn't affection. And the love that requires you to shrink yourself to fit into it isn't love. It's control, wrapped in a beautiful package. It builds a gilded cage that feels impossible to leave because questioning it feels like the ultimate betrayal. But your feelings are valid. That discomfort is a message. Your need for your own life isn't a flaw. It's a right. The most powerful thing you can do is to finally trust that inner voice, honor your boundaries, and learn the difference between what nourishes you and what merely chains you. So the next time you're on the receiving end of some overwhelming generosity, the next time someone's kindness starts to feel less like a gift and more like a weight, I want you to pause. Ask yourself one simple, powerful question. Is this building me up, or is it tying me down? Is this a gift, or is it a cage? The answer will tell you everything you need to know. Congratulations, you've just taken another step toward mastering psychological self-defense. Here on Psych-Jitsu, we dive deep into neuroscience-based tactics, psychological strategies, and martial arts mindset training to help you protect your mind and navigate any situation with confidence. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss an upload. Psych-Jitsu isn't just theory, it's your first line of defense.